Welcome back. Episode 14 to the Long and Thick podcast, where your two denim matching stepdads help you navigate the noise and cut through the bullshit in the health and wellness space.
Yes, sir.
I don't know if we're wearing the exact same pair, but they're pretty close. We both have that ass stripe.
It's true.
Which is just the way of the
wise.
wise.
Ass stripe.
Yes. So this is the third part of our injury series. Just to recap, we went through injuries, what they are, how they happen, some of the impacts and implications of being injured. Episode 13, our last episode, we talked about what do you do while you're injured. You're in that space currently. Very valuable for a listener who is in the middle of an injury. And now we're going to dive into where you are teetering out of that space. You're getting back into feeling good. Some of the pitfalls we want to advise against, things that we very commonly see, and some tips on how to better prevent further injury just across the board, and also in the space where you may have just been injured.
Sure. Yeah. Pretty much covered everything. Main thing is just what is the best case scenario and course of action, both in terms of your focus and the balance of your time in making your abilities better and more consistent in the future. Is one, listening to whatever practitioner you've enlisted to help you rehabilitate from your injury, whether it be a physical therapist, massage therapist, an orthopedic surgeon, whatever they prescribe to you. One, make sure you're just doing it first and foremost. That is something that is a bit of a gamble if you're just going to play fast and loose with that.
Yeah.
That suggestion. It's like, here, I'm a professional. This is how you should fix your body.
And you're like, yeah, we'll see, pal.
Right. Yeah. So there's that. And then the biggest thing that we see is, and that we contend with in our respective practices, is people that the second that they feel remotely better, then they just think that they're rehabilitated.
Yeah.
Which actually they're just now getting back to being on the back foot again of normalcy.
Yes.
Let alone being fully effective in whatever role they're trying to get back to.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing we'll dive into. But also to just maybe you're not necessarily injured or have just rehabilitated injury, but there are certain life practices that we will see, former athletes, current athletes, things where it might not be a grievous acute injury, but it's a cumulative effect that is going to have damning effects on the body that you can't get away from.
Yeah.
And how to best get ahead of that, or conversely rehabilitate when things start to decline in terms of performance. So yeah.
Yeah, I love it. You sort of spawned a thought for me here in terms of something that some of our listeners can probably resonate with. And there's the people that are starting to do better, right? You're like following your protocols and programs, and you're seeing the systematic change. That's a slow crawl, but you're feeling the changes. You're noticing like the knee pain's not as bad or whatever your thing is. And then you hit this point where you're like, oh shit, I feel like I'm like better. And that's really important to embrace, but you don't want to suddenly add a whole bunch of gasoline to that fire. Especially when you get the like formal all clear from a PT, a chiro, surgeon, whatever. There's this idea that people have that is really damning, in that someone else's advice or review of you supersedes your own ability to like have any sensible introspection.
Your own intuition and instincts.
Yeah.
Oh, well, they have this voice. That
the
has to be
doctor
right.
told me that I was good to go. He is not your knee. He is not, or she. They are not their governing force of all of the intricacies of your body. You still need to be your own boss with this. hear them, heed them, listen. They know more than you about this, probably. So for sure, take the advice, go through the program. But just because someone gives you this like check mark and then you're discharged from care, it doesn't mean that you're ready to go and cut and sprint and do high level soccer or whatever the thing is. Even if you're feeling good. And so there's a way to segue continually past that point, which we'll talk about. And then the other part that I feel like is really important, that is what I was talking about earlier that you sort of kicked into my brain, is sometimes people don't feel like they're getting better, but objectively they are. Meaning you're moving more weight, you're tolerating more adversity in your movement and more variability, but your pain is not necessarily changing that much. You're still heading the right way.
Absolutely. No.
So yeah, if you're listening to this and you hear that, I hope that like gives you a nice pat on the shoulder. I was going to say something else that maybe isn't good. So it's if you are objectively getting better, your numbers are going up, like you're still heading the right way. Don't let the pain be the only thing that dictates things. And again, on the other side of the coin, don't let the lack of pain be the indicator that you think you have the strength.
Yeah, that your health meter's back to 100 and all everything's you're green yet. For sure. And we talk about it all the time at great length, but if hopefully whoever is programming your rehabilitation, it needs to be empirical and it needs to be progressive. Like you need to have actual goalposts that you're hitting in terms of ability, whether it be range of motion, ability, endurance, strength, repetition. Those need to be going up. And to your point, if there is still a commensurate amount of pain, but your abilities are going up, you are improving. Yep. You are getting better. Your body's going in the right direction. It might not feel the best, but if you are empirically being more sound at your movements and your ability to move weight, you are improving. And you should take solace in that. And just to echo the exact same thing you said, just because something feels normal and you maybe woke up one morning and the movement just feels as close to natural as possible, maybe isn't as tweaky, creaky, whatever. That does not mean that you are fully healed, rejuvenated back to, again, you are just now entering the threshold of being at the lowest possible thing of your normal abilities.
Yep.
And if you're not continuing to train into that and still elevate those endurances, those strengths, those mobilities, then you are just one step forward from being better and one step backward from falling off the cliff again.
Sure.
And potentially re-injuring yourself. And that's not to scare anybody, but it's the actual truth. Right. It's just keeping a perspective. Now talking about, I totally just lost my train of thought, but talking about when someone is maybe not pushing past that and going up to that threshold and stopping. Conversely, do you want to talk about someone who can't get out of the rehab rabbit hole? It just turns into circling the drain and it becomes its own identity trait for them that they're not actually progressing from. Do you see that in your line of work?
I do. And a lot of that ends up just being the mental neuro side of things. So like an example is the person who has like a 48-minute routine that if they don't do, they are fucked in their brain. Like, oh, I can't go and just like play pickup basketball unless I do my like 77 step program because my PT told me that I have a tear here and a this. There's a couple things to this. A, if you're being diagnosed with something without like imaging, it is an educated guess. Like, great example, had somebody in this week with a very fucking clear PCL obliteration.
Oh no.
I mean, the knee just doesn't have any backstop to it from this ligament. Do I know for sure? No. Would I put money on it? Yes. But can I 100% objectively say this is the condition here? No. So if you're somebody who has been through this process and has been like, oh, this feels like this is probably, if you hear this is probably a rotator cuff tear or a labral tear or a this thing or whatever, be careful not to just wear that without imaging. And even still, it doesn't matter that much. Like, it's just the name of the thing. So don't infuse it as this part of like, well, I got to be careful putting the cup back on the cupboard because my rotator cuff
is just a shot. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not really a badge of honor. And I get it. Like heat it, listen to your body, of course, do all the things. I'm not trying to flip the script, like just ignore it and head through the pain. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is the people that stay stuck in that loop of shit are, they love to wear their disc herniation or their broken this thing. And it's like, dude, if that was 8 fucking years ago, guess what? Like, you don't really get to play that card all the time.
You maybe had 6 to 12 months of discomfort, but if you didn't do anything to correct that, because it is very much correctable, you're just being a victim and you're choosing to get stuck in the mud.
Yeah, which is like, I get it. You don't want to get hurt again. You want to avoid that thing because it really sucks, and it sucked when it happened, and it was a terrible process, and the aftermath and fallout from it is really unpleasant, but you don't need to like stay stuck in that space. So the people who are constantly just like wearing the injury, rattling off the list of the thing, I'm like, okay, that's where the first reframe needs to happen, to get you back into that high performing position. But then the other side of it is the people that are starting to feel good and then will just like go ape shit and then re-tear the thing. And that is a very unfortunate thing. The amount of people that I see that come in and they're like, I got to be honest, I stopped doing stuff because it felt better and now it's worse than it was before I even started. And I'm like, okay, I don't want you to feel attached and stuck with like doing your PRI thing for the rest of your life. There is a progression that needs to happen. And if that's not clearly laid out with you and your provider, then you need to make sure that you say something about it. Hey, are we going to upgrade this? Hey, are we going to progress this? Hey, I think I'm ready for more. I'm not in your body. You're not in their body. It's a two-way road. So don't fall into that pitfall.
Yeah, no, it is. I see it even in like muscle strains and little tweaks that in the personal training world or the people that I coach, if they're going through something and they just, we do some mobility work to correct a shoulder issue, or, we work through a strain, things like that. The second they get better, I mean, I am lucky that I am good at cultivating kind of that high performing killer instinct, always wanting to progress as fast as possible. So the minute they feel normal, to your point, they will immediately fall back on, all right, cool, let's get back to the way we were. It's like, we can't do that. We need to scale this up. We need proof of concept that your body, can we get close to it? Yes. But the smart money is, we'll hit a percentage value of like 50% of our previous working load. Next week, 75, maybe the next week, 90. Your body's going to get the strength and the high level ability back very quickly. Far quicker the second or third time through than it took to get it the first time. But yeah, there needs to be some restraints. And furthermore, there needs to be also some focus and doing the due diligence on the boring stuff to ensure that grievous little thing, hopefully it's small. But again, if you have a catastrophic injury, you have to rebuild a joint or, reset a bone, a lot more is going to go into that. And it's in your best interest to see it through, exhaust a little bit of extra time to ensure that you can get that joint or that bone or that muscle or that tendon as bulletproof as you can. Because why would you ever want to relive that?
You don't. And it is very avoidable. The reason that I think so many people fall back into re-injury is you're not patient enough. You didn't keep progressing the thing after you started to feel better. You got back into your sport too soon. And here we can segue into how fucked up it is that athletes, especially at high elite levels in NFL, NBA, MLB, all of the things, WNBA, like they tape the fuck out of your joint and they're like, all right, go. And it's like, hey, that Achilles is like ruptured. And it's like, I'm so numb and adrenaline full that I can finish the game. But, people don't recognize the difference between having a team of people constantly working on you like you're a fucking F1 car.
Sure.
You come in for a pit stop. That's the pit stop, is taping the shit out of the thing. After that, they're doing a million things. They're flushing it right away. They're dry needling. They're doing acupuncture. They're doing laser therapy, shockwave. They have access to things that we don't, that you who are listening probably don't. So when it takes your injury a little bit longer to get better, or you look at Joe, whoever the fuck, in some team, because I don't know anything about football, it's like, oh, his Achilles is torn and he was back in 3 months and whatever. And it's like, you're not that.
Had 12 sets of eyes watching him before, during, after, and then post injury. He had PT, chiro, massage, and ortho at his disposal.
Endless resource for nutrition, IVs, drugs, supplements. That, like the resource is just like, you're over here trying to navigate this. And again, for our watchers, you get an extra bonus, my hand diagrams. and these guys
His
are up
New
here.
York sensibilities alive and well.
That's right. My fucking gabagool. But those are things that are important to recognize and consider and be aware of when you are getting back into the performance side. The other side of the coin too is that like a F1 car, a high performing car, the people listening who maybe you drive like a GTR 3, like you probably don't daily that. You probably don't take your like Lamborghini to, the office every day. And there's a reason. It hits a pothole. It's a fucking nightmare. the performative qualities that it has come at a cost. And so there's a reason that the Corolla drives forever. It's doing its simple task, right? Here and there. How we are like cars in this way is that the people who are constantly under extreme demand, stress, sleep deprivation, travel, all of the things, there's a bigger, higher cost. They're like burning at jet fuel level where we're, trudging through the dirt a little bit slower.
Yeah, so it's the metaphor of the brightest stars burn the least in terms of duration.
Yes.
So, and that's the thing too, is even if, most athletes at a high level, unfortunately, are going to contend with some injury acutely, but furthermore, it is a meter that's being depleted with not a lot to refill it along the way, because it is a degradative process, especially if your particular sport or activity is heavy on hips, knees, and shoulders. It's gnarly, and there will have to be at least a lot of rehab, or some potentially most likely surgeries, and not to also scare anybody, but if you've been a D1 or even professional athlete, it's just part of the process.
Yeah.
But the difference, though, is in today's world, with the information age and technology at our disposal, and constantly seeing the human element constantly refresh in new levels of performance, which is awesome. It pushes people to be better, faster, stronger, to have a certain amount of drive with less imagination and more practical push when they see people performing. Like, oh, well, I now know it's possible-ish, and I'm going to go after that. The problem is when we're talking about rehabilitation and we are imploring you to seek professional advice, find a practitioner that does specialize in your nature of injury, and listen to that person and follow the rehabilitation protocol. Where this becomes problematic is because now we have almost like a physical form of WebMD now when it comes to either watching YouTube, consuming Instagram, or now worse, taking what ChatGPT can say and prescribe and administer, which is really bad, because if you start like cross-referencing what actual programs look like, what actual or even nutrition, for instance, most of the time the math doesn't even add up if you really look at it. So I know everyone loves to enlist these kind of things, but if you're an amateur athlete trying to get better at your particular pursuit, it still pays to have a actual professional practitioner or coach or something in what you're trying to pursue. Because whether it be CrossFit, High Rocks, those are like the big things now. It's you're going to lean on just some random arbitrary synthesized information of words that's algorithm shot out. And then conversely, you don't know how this is going to start moving you toward an injurious state. Hopefully it doesn't, but you're going to try to, hit your WOD or whatever it is with the maximum amount of efficacy. And you don't know what you don't know. And if you're just taking these random bits of information, hoping for the best while executing at what is a high level to you, you could inadvertently be putting yourself at risk and not even realizing it.
Right. Yeah, that is massively important to consider and recognize. I have you run into a lot of high rocks, like injury people or people
not
that are starting
necessarily
to want
injury people
to train?
But there has been a budding interest across my table, whether it be clients I already work with or clients that had an interest in working with me on, say, strength and conditioning, but they're like, hey, listen, I also have this other interest. What do you think about high rocks? And I will help. I mean, it's not my area of expertise. I will do due diligence and learning as much about it as I can if someone's really that set on it. But yeah, it is something that is now, I won't call it a cult, but it's that herd mentality. Like a lot of extra interest comes in, and then a lot of people's interest and focus all starts heading that way. Their friends, it's basically the equivalent of high level pickleball at this moment.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
And again, if you like pickleball, not yucking your yum. If you like high rocks, also, hey, you like what you like.
100%.
I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not condemning any of it, but it is a noticeable change in trend over the last 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, and I think if you have a budding interest in something that is novel to you as a more athletic type of person with a colorful injury history, it's important that you work with somebody who knows how to raise the bar on the qualities of tissue capacities that you need more of for your sports demand. Putting it simpler, work with somebody who knows how to build up your needs to accomplish the task.
Yeah, always just enlist a professional. And it might not be the first opinion, it might need a second opinion or a third one, but it is your body, it is your time, and it ultimately could be a lot more money you did not intend to spend if you get that wrong on your own.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you don't want none of that. Should we dive into some of the tissue quality changes?
Sure.
Is that a good next place to jump into?
I think so. Okay.
So part of what I was just talking about, and we've been a little bit redundant maybe with the how to rehab, what type of things to consider in terms of like loading the thing, getting back into it. We're going to talk a little bit more about how to actually do that. And again, hopefully somebody, I would, let me preface this and say, don't necessarily take this advice and run with this. This is like the outline of how some of these mechanisms work. We haven't assessed you. So if I say do this thing for your ankle to like move a little better, don't, because I haven't seen your fucking ankle.
Sure.
So don't come at me and be like, yo, you said, and
yes, that is a really good call out too, where because we're in the information age and we can consume so many what we consider factual things at record speeds and concentrations, everyone wants a black and white silver bullet. This is the absolute best case scenario, winnable thing. It's not how this works. There is nuance in everything.
Yeah.
There's not enough practical thinking and intuition and deliberation internally, person to person, in how this may or may not affect your goals, your abilities, all of that. I mean, we see it in so many different avenues of health, wellness, fitness, longevity, where it also becomes tribal because people will file into one camp and be like, hey, this is exactly how you do this to do that. And then another person's like, nope, it's exactly. So what he is saying is we're going to give you background and some context on where our minds would go to in terms of keeping you injury free, working with tissues, connective and otherwise, to give you the best chance at being strong and bulletproof. This is not a recommendation to go do exactly what we talk about the second you hear it.
Yeah.
That is not it.
Right.
It needs nuance. It needs consideration. It needs a little bit of, pros and cons of, hey, does this actually work for me and my abilities? Yes, no. Don't just run with it because we said it.
Yeah.
And always look more into things and don't just take something at face value.
Yeah. And do this even with your providers too. You don't need to be like combative or like, you should be semi-cynical. You should be questioning stuff and having open dialogue about some of these things, like, hey, you know, what's the thought process behind here? If providers' answers are not quite like, it depends, let's see how this applies to you, then maybe, you know, shop around a little bit.
Yeah.
So we'll dive into that here in just a sec.
So when it comes to talking about injury prevention or bulletproofing, getting on the better side of rehab, say we're talking about muscle tears, strains, which we see the most of in our line of work. Where do your instincts, where does your mind go first and foremost when someone comes in that maybe has a chronic re-injury potential, or just they had this one injury and they say they never want to have that happen again? Best step forward, what are you hitting them with?
Yeah. So I think there's two parts to that. The first part is like, what is pissing it off? What keeps being like the flare up thing? We can use like a hamstring, for example, because that's pretty common. So let's say that every time they go and sprint, initially they're like getting warmed up. They have some weird little funk close to like bottom of the ass cheek. And then it goes away, very like indicative of like tendon stuff, right? It starts to clear up. Part of that is because some of that excess fluid gets squeezed out of the tendon, which can be part of what is causing the feelings of irritation in part. That's not the whole picture. I thought
you said it's exactly what happened.
That is literally, I can see the drops of water leaving your tendon. I can feel it actually in your aura. But I'm considering like, what are your demands and what do we need to bolster more of? Probably the most ignored thing across the board is just like training to length, right? So when we talk about bulletproofing in quotes, or like becoming injury mitigation experts, there is a lot you can do, but at the end of the day, you cannot prepare for everything. So we're trying to build up as much of the qualities that you need for the demand at hand to best fight against things.
Sure.
It doesn't mean that it will. Sometimes a fucking car hits you from the side. I don't give a shit how much you've trained. It doesn't matter.
No
like, yeah, like sometimes the ankle rolls a little weird because there was a rock and yada, yada, yada. Like you can train the things, but you can't ever just fully stave it off. But there's a lot more that you can do than you realize. So training to length looks like getting somebody to, one of my favorite ways with a hamstring is having somebody crawl with a appropriate resistance band around a heel. So you'd be laying on your stomach, hence the crawling. You'd pick the hamstring side that's feeling funky, or do both if they're both sort of fucked. And you are trying to hold the tissue closed, right? So you're trying to draw your heel to your ass and squeeze that contraction, get the tissue to squeeze and hold that position. Now, as you crawl away, you're inherently adding more tension to the band, to the back of the heel, to that leverage. You're going to lose, as you should. And you are lengthening the tissue slowly. What the big difference that I have people do is that I'll have them pause and stop and hold. The reason being is because when tissue is being contracted, the energy dissipation that is being forced through either the, we'll call it red stuff, which is your contractile tissue, or the white stuff is going to slightly change in how much is going where. So when I stop and hold something isometrically, it means without movement, instead of it all just being forced into that contractile force, like where my actual muscle fibers are trying to shorten and close, now some of that energy is getting more dissipated into the connective elastic tissue that is interwoven through all of that stuff, which is the majority of where the injury thing is actually happening. And so holding that position is sending a signal to your body to build up the qualities of that architecture.
Yeah. Hardening it over time.
Right. Yeah. Building its ability to deal with that force. So we never do these things to pain. Discomfort's fine. But that's an easy example of a way that people can, understand, hopefully training to lengthen how that can mitigate some of that stuff.
Sure. And I think a way of understanding it too, for people that can't necessarily imagine the visual representation of that or the real world application of that, is if you are just now approaching fitness, or you're just now approaching weights, things like that, your day-to-day life is going to have a pretty limited range of motion. Once you start adding weight to things, it will actually elongate that range. It'll push you in directions that you'll have to control that you're not used to doing in your day-to-day life. Even down to say like a bicep curl. If you put your arm out this way, you'll probably stop here. If you're not used to underweight, this will start to extend that, what he's talking about, the connective tissue. And ultimately, you not being used to the extended range of motion, or your body not used to holding weight in a elongated range of motion, is how these injuries occur. So if you are then approaching anything with weight or a new compound exercise, you are in a more elongated range of motion. And if your body's not used to it and you're foolhardy with how you scale your weight, these are how a lot of these injuries happen. These are what we have to contend with. So everything that he's talking about is in a controlled fashion, trying to bridge the gap between the extreme of fully elongated underweight and then completely being underutilized and under lengthened with our day-to-day lives. So that's basically the premise of this entire episode, is making sure that your elongated ranges of motion can support weight adequately and how to scale that up.
Can you dive into the flip side? So really talking about the contractile side, like where we build up the hypertrophy side of things specifically, and how that differs from where we would want to create separation between the long, moderate, eccentric, the hold, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, for people's health and longevity long term, I think they should go hand in hand.
Yes.
And what people don't realize too is if they do have a strength and hypertrophy minded goal, then the contractile tissue is going to grow and strengthen at a faster rate than the connective tissue. So if the lengthened stuff is not properly addressed, you're just raising your case of injury potential anyway.
Right.
So on the hypertrophy side, that's a little bit of a muckiness on the internet right now, because you have rival camps that cherry pick some information. Won't go into it too deeply, but that your muscle, the contractile tissue, the hypertrophy, can actually grow the best at fully lengthened positions, which I will say in my experience, leaning too far into that for too long is going to hold you back. It's going to increase inflammation. It's going to increase recovery times, and it's going to have a compounding negative effect overall if you train everything to a maximally lengthened or stretched position.
And that's a good principle across the board. But what he's talking about specifically here, like when we're getting nitty gritty, is growing muscle.
Yes.
And think of it like the two lanes of the highway. Like you want to be able to close the joint. So bicep curl is very clear. Everybody knows it very well. That's the hypertrophic contractile side, getting better at that ability to close. And what I was referring to is going the opposite way. And what he was talking about earlier, the joint lengthening or getting further apart, opening up. So, what is the best way to ensure, hypertrophy in bolstering that need?
Yeah. I mean, there are a handful of muscles that have been shown to actually grow under better stretch conditions, glutes, quads, pecs being the big three that come to my mind. But as long as you're in a reasonable range of motion, like utilizing say 70 to 80%, and I won't muddy the waters too much with leverage curves on individual muscles yet.
With the long head of the tricep or that's where
we're that also becomes a bit too much of a neurotic thing that people get way too busied with. It actually doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Just lift the shit or push the shit. It's fine.
Right.
But yeah, quality contractions with most of the range of motion in mind is fine. And a progressive overload program. That will do it. As long as you just lift more weight every week and you're not a complete asshole with your form, and pretty much biomechanically your body will figure it out.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some people that have some askew visions of form and
Sure.
like, oh, maybe some help, maybe, but just lift the weight. And it comes to the other side though, as I'm not saying this is the best for muscle building, but it is the best for keeping your muscles not strained, which is also the best for muscle building.
Yes.
Is splitting up, especially when it comes to compound lifts. Anything that requires a lot of like hip hinging or back extension, or deep like squat style, orientations, there is a lot of stress in adductors, low back, especially. And those are like the big problem areas. So when it comes to people that I train and that want to have higher level compound efficacy, then we're doing a lot of slow eccentrics, like you were talking about, elongating that tissue, but not at a maximum weight. It'll be a percentage of what they can actually tolerate, because that connective tissue up to that point was only used to kind of short bursts. They're not used to holding a ton of weight and feeling those, fibers starting to fray. And that's good. Like a little discomfort is fine. So that would look like, say, pause squats at the bottom, pauses somewhere in the middle of a Romanian deadlift or really slow eccentric from top position back down to the floor. And that also is scaled up. So to allow the connective tissue to build at its slower rate than the muscle belly would. And, tendon hardness does come at also needing a lot of weight over time. It does need the progressive overload just like the muscle does.
Yep.
So there has to be nuance in everything. Like I said, don't just take this as like, oh, he said to do slow eccentrics on deadlift and then they tweak their back. It needs to be administered in a way that makes sense for your abilities, your body, your genetic leverages, all of those things. But that not being said, that is how I have kept my deadlift truly injury-free for 15 years. With
no belt,
no
grips.
Yeah. No straps or anything.
Yeah.
So
no knee fucking condoms. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I am not condemning any of that. It's just, but if you want to do it and you are patient and you have a plan, you don't actually need those things. Your body can do it. And I'm not saying everyone run out and just abolish the belts and the straps and the knee sleeves. Not saying that.
Right.
But if you have a slow and steady wins a race mentality and you sit there and you look at what the body can and can't do, where the weaknesses are, then don't think that you're going to add 100 pounds to a deadlift in a year. Just sit there and creep, 2.5, 5 pounds a week, and then maybe skip a week of trying to get stronger and just work on even longer length stuff.
Yes.
Holds.
Jefferson curls, get funky with it.
Yeah. And to ensure that at every step of the way in this newfound strength that you found, that the pieces holding it all together can actually support the newfound strength.
Yes.
And that is the biggest takeaway, is just elongate things, put them under load. This is not saying that this makes your muscles bigger. It doesn't, but it makes your entire comprehensive frame stronger.
Yes.
And there needs to be applications in both of those things for your overall health, longevity, quality of life. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Back to you, Ronnie Grant.
No, that's very, very well said. Getting into a little bit more of the tendinous side, right? So this is where you have the muscle begins to insert onto a bone somewhere. And that is what gets the muscle contracts. And then those two ends will make that bone move in a way. Probably the most simple and clear way to explain loading a tendon would be like a 45-degree knee extension. Right. So you're seated. When we're talking about tendons, we're talking about really, really, really high load relative to you. So this will inherently be pretty safe, considering you're not really going to be able to move what you can't move. So like you can't just really put yourself in a position where it's going to fuck you up. Probably fucking many asterisks and fireworks going off in my brain. Like, wait, don't say that. But I do feel that way. So if you're seated on a knee extension, this is a great rehab exercise for people with like runner's knee, things that are just like funky in the knee area. The way that tendon gets loaded again is when you have stopped moving. This isn't the only way. This is a good way to load a tendon. And it's under a lot of load, meaning all of the tissue that goes into where that tendon goes is now being sort of pulled on like a tug of war. And that is where the tendon actually starts to slide, because there's a bunch of different layers to that tissue. And so if you want to get the most of them engaged, you need all of the contractile tissue to be pulling on that thing, which is why it's so profound to be in like a 45-degree angle under a heavy load and just holding it. It might feel a little funky, but again, think of it like having a conversation with the problem is a way that I tell people. Like, you need to go and talk to the thing. So if you're getting some feedback, don't call it bad or good or anything. It's just information. So things that you want to consider when like getting back into the performance demands of whatever your thing is are, what are the demands? What was the thing that fucked me up, right? Like, and how do I create as many options for my body to be resilient and across the board? And so that's really what we're talking about here. We're talking about options. Daniel's talking about not just doing deadlifts a certain way, but opening up the other lane of the road, right? And we want to expose our bodies to as much as is realistic for them to adapt in the way that we need them to for what we're asking it to do. And it is a progressive thing. It doesn't happen overnight, the same way you probably suck ass at shooting the basketball the first time, unless you're some prodigy, but usually people have to put in the reps, right? It's the same idea as establishing a skill. It is literally the same exact thing. Sure. It's just a different, end result.
And if I can cut you off,
please.
So this is another kind of recheck-in moment for anybody listening, that if you are in pain, if you have a mobility issue, if you have a rehab issue, time cannot be your excuse. You need to move some things around. You need to re-leverage your priorities. Trust me when I say you do not want to, and people do, unfortunately, people do live with an injury and just allow it to persist and fester in their day-to-day lives. Get ahead of it.
Yeah.
Don't watch the TV show that you have slated for the evening. Don't, take some of the social calendar down a little bit. Get ahead of it. It's not easy. I know we all have the same 24 hours in a day, but make it so your life does not have an orbit of pain in it.
Yeah.
I mean, really, like, why? That should not be the case for anybody.
Yeah.
And anything is surmountable, save having some crazy caustic terminal disease inside you, which I hope you don't, anybody. But if you're like, oh, well, that's just shitty, but I haven't had time to fix it, that's on you. And you should. And it should not constantly be encroaching on your just good vibes of life. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's important too, that when we're talking about high performance things, that was crazy. Interesting. High performance things and high performing people, it's okay to have little like nags. I think people think like being like so pain-free and perfect and training perfect like means like nothing ever feels like anything. And
we have dog shit weeks for sure.
For sure.
But I also have a Ronnie Grant to be like, hey, why is my shit fucked up?
Help. Yeah. Right. So there is a balance to like having things feel like I don't know. It's almost, I think it's better that way. Not that I'm not in pain currently, but like when things feel like, my neck is a great example. We were just talking about this before we started. Like I started doing this neck harness work. That's so annoying. I don't know where that fucking device is. We've been impregnated, dude. Hello, God, it's me, Margaret. Turn it off. But yeah, like my neck is very sore right now because I started doing some stuff that I was not quite ready for, but knowing my body well, I took it to the brink of like, I didn't injure myself, but if I had done maybe like another 10 minutes of work, I would probably be feeling injured versus like very sore.
Sure.
And so there is like a dance to it and all that. So don't get so lost in your feelings. Listen to your body, trust your gut, trust your intuition, trust a good provider. You want to go into like a couple tips and things that we do in terms of like, it might be sort of circling back on things, but at least another version of like practical thought process and rationale and like when you're feeling something.
Yeah. A easy way for this to kind of come from a place that I work with my clients from is, so when we're pushing for maximal strength stuff, for you to get the most out of it, you need to be getting close to your absolute threshold ceiling of what your body can do. In doing so, your body, I mean, it's like survival instinct. And if it's just going to get it done however it can get done, generally your ranges of motion will start to shorten as you get close to your actual maximum abilities. What I would suggest to you is, if you're really trying to train for strength, get after it, but it's not going to be a linear, always up progression. So I have to kind of recheck in. My clients love setting new PRs every week, but at a certain point, your range of motion is going to go down and down and down, which again, we're no longer pollinating our connective tissue as much. So I always encourage them, every 2-3 weeks, we're going to have not necessarily a deload week. I mean, we're maybe going down 5% of our working load, but just rechecking in with our end ranges of motion so they can actually control the weight and actually encourage and remind the body. It's like, hey, our muscles can move this, but we need to be able to support and stabilize this at longer ranges. And then it's funny because their strength is going up at the absolute top end, their reps are still prettier 5% down because they have the added strength, but they also have the new control. So it's nice to kind of just oscillate through that and not just chase numbers all the time. And then kind of hearkening back to, say, like deadlift and squat is, do your maximal strength stuff, however your program is administered, but definitely pepper in some pauses, some absolute stretch stuff under load, and progress that as well. I mean, something that I use for myself, my clients, for if you want to get your maximal level squat up and not have anything tweaky on the lower back or in the adductors, is say 60 to 75% of your 1 rep max. Do a couple sets of 3 reps with a 3 to 5 second pause at the bottom, and try to just live in that. And you're going to start shaking, and your body, that is your connective tissues at work. Like
active bottom, just to clarify, versus like the versus like the where you just fucking shit and melt into yourself.
So you want actual full torque on your glutes and your thighs, because at a certain point, even under load, you can drop past that and just
literally be flopped.
Yeah, and like just lay on the backs of your legs, and your body can support that through your ankles. But under absolute load at about like 90 or just below. So those are my 2 little tips.
Yeah, those are great. Mine are fairly similar. I think anytime you have some kind of funk going on, this is a way that I even treat. We'll start just doing some like low level isometrics and exploring some of that pain arc that happens. I use the analogy of like turning up a dial very often. And so I'll say something like, give me like 10% effort, and imagine like you're drawing a line in the sand the second that you feel pain. And let's say you feel pain at like 15% effort, and I want you at 14. I want you to just be tiptoed right off of that line of pain, but still driving force and sensation through that area. Hold it 10, 15 seconds. If it's very low effort, then I would say you probably hold in the range of 30 to 45 seconds to a minute. And when we start getting into that, 95%, 100% effort, you wouldn't really have any pain there. But when we start getting closer to that, your duration would decrease. So, we're talking 3 to 5, 6 to 10 seconds, depending on that percent of effort and the position. That's a really good way to clear up any like neuro funk where like you perceive you're hurt and you start moving through something and you're really not. Your body's just sort of being a bitch.
Can you give us like a quick little illustration of like a particular movement with that rep endurance scheme, just for someone that needs a little more visual?
Absolutely. So probably one of the easiest ones, because it is a very weak lever, it would be like having arm out to your side at 90 degrees and getting into like any type of shoulder rotation. So if people have like a shoulder pinch or a funky thing somewhere in the, we'll say in the backside, right? So as my shoulder goes backwards, I'm closing down that joint space in the backside. I would have them load in that same painful direction right before that point of sensation and feedback comes.
And just hold that for
they would hold it.
Seconds.
Yeah. So if your tolerance to creating force that way is very low, right? Like if it hurts you to just move a little bit, then all I'm going to ask of you is just a little less than what is hurting you. And you basically just keep scaling it back, and you'll feel that it starts to really clear up pretty quickly. So it's a great way to like progressively, open up a space or load that. We didn't really talk about joint stuff. And honestly, I'm fine with that. And y'all will have to fucking ask a question about it. And then we'll dive into like joint health specifically and how.
And then we'll tell you something and tell you to disregard it completely to go get assessed.
Yes, because that is fucking true. You're N of 1. You need to have a formal assessment. Don't listen to fucking anybody unless they put hands on you, eyes on you, have an idea of who and what you are and your whole history, because that is really such a game changer in getting you out of the.
It is so unique to the individual and the circumstance, and we can paint a landscape to at least get your brain thinking, but unless someone can see what you can and can't do and what you're dealing with, you cannot directly take what we say and apply it to your body.
Yeah.
You can get, like I said, suggestions, some ideas, and just get the imagination ball rolling. But everybody's body is different.
Yep.
And it just treat the thing right. Do your due diligence. Have someone with more experience than you ensuring that you're doing the right things, and be strong and live a long life.
Hell yeah. Be strong, live long. That's good. We hope that this has been helpful for you. If you do have any other questions that come up in terms of injury, performance, those types of things, we'd be happy to entertain the conversation. And we will catch you on the flippity flop.
Yes, sir.
Until then.
Bye, motherfucker.